how do we deal with the despair of climate change, which even at the dialogues a few young people were expressing that. Does one just through chanting or meditation find the energy to deal with it?
If you look at the seriousness of the ecological crisis or the ecological distractions that we see around us, I personally feel that it is not the lack of awareness that is causing the ecological distraction that is around us. But then even with that awareness, we are not able to act on our awareness to change our behaviors or practices. So, why is it that? Why is it like that? And then, is it because that is how the course of action is, and then hence we are aiding the process of ecological distraction? And then when you were saying that Buddha died because of poisoning of food, there again the person who served the food was a tool maybe for his end. So I
understand what you're saying. Like,
so
he was an instrument through which the death had to come.
Because it had to happen.
And that's what Buddha also said. At one point, Buddha said, if I wanted, I could live for 100 years more. But that would not help in any way. This is the time when I have to go. And so he was very specific. He said, don't blame that fellow who serves me food. It's not his fault. This is how it is supposed to be. These are the causes and conditions under which I have to go.
But how is this connected with climate change?
No, what I'm saying is, why are we not able to translate our awareness into action or change in behavior? Is it because the earth has to end and then we are being used as a tool to the distraction? I don't know, because I don't understand what prevents us from changing our behavior. Because in my personal experience, in Kerala, where I come from, the land has gone through 2 massive floods in consecutive years. And we have seen severe distraction. And then all people, including children, know the causes behind that distraction. And everybody is so active, and then the entire world, I think the nation appreciated the relief measures in Kerala. Everybody came together and then everybody was so compassionate and then helping each other. After a week, things have changed. So we went back to our karma of destroying the earth. So this thing I don't understand. And then at some point I also feel like whatever effort that I'm putting in saving a little bit of whatever, which I feel like doing, I don't know why I feel so, is not resulting in any massive change. So is my action in that sense is against the desire of nature?
So for a moment, keeping aside this theory that maybe it's destined to end and we are the instruments that will bring it to its end, keeping that aside for a moment, I feel sometimes that the reason why we don't do these small things which we would individually do is actually connected to the despair. Because in your heart, while you spout it because it's politically correct, put up the lights, don't leave the fans on, don't use the plastic bags, recycle whatever you can, and all this. I think the despair is so great that in your heart of hearts you know this is not going to help. I think that could be one, because the despair is so great. Maybe this is something we know from in the bottom of our, by instinct we know this, and that increases the despair, and also that will prompt us to really do the small things. So, this is Bill McKibben. He's the founder of 350.org. He writes in his article, if 10 or even 15% of us, meaning the world's population, of us do everything we can to reduce our carbon footprint, don't fly too much, don't do all that, the trajectory of our horror remains about the same. Even if 15% of the world's population does all these individual things for reducing whatever is contributing to climate change, yet he adds, if even 10% of us also work all out to change the system, that will be more than enough. The problem is not only personal but structural. So this we know in our heart of hearts, that the structure is not changing with what we are doing, and the structure is the structure of big corporates, fossil fuel companies, and so on. The way our present economic and political institutions continue to promote fossil fuels and encourage consumerism generally. So, and then comes the, okay, so now we understand this is the change that is required, but man, like fossil fuel companies, think of their power, their hold over governments, think of the banking institutions, the financial institutions that support them. How are the 10% of us going to fight that? So that may bring a sense of frustration, despair, and so we console ourselves maybe. This is a very personal opinion, I may be completely wrong. We console ourselves by saying, I will not use styrofoam coffee cup. I will always use coffee. I'll drink coffee only in a glass. But what this guy is saying, even if 15% of the world's population does all of this, nothing's going to change. Because the change is really required structurally.
Nothing will change, but you're running good karma by not being,
So you will progress individually. You will get rebirth on another planet when Earth is destroyed. But climate change will continue. Nothing will happen means climate change will continue.
I've also heard that a lot of the talk around individual actions are important, and that emphasis comes because it's a way to make us feel like we are the cause, whereas it blinds us from actually looking at the structure.
I agree. It's blaming the victim. What I said yesterday in another context. I seriously feel I am being blamed for something I was protesting 30 years ago when we were talking of sustainable development, where there was a possibility of sustainable development. Forget sustainability, which we discussed, but even sustainable development. I feel it is a bit of blaming the victim. But still, where you can take hope in individual action is, how are you going to mobilize that 15 or 20%, or how are you going to mobilize that, inspire the 10% who will work towards political change? You could inspire them by your individual actions. So to create a higher consciousness about climate change, to create awareness about climate change, this may be very useful, your individual action. So if you are in a restaurant with friends who are not very aware of all this, and the waiter brings, sometimes they bring in paper cups, in certain places, smaller places, and you say, I don't want this, you give me in a glass, then all your friends might say, what is all this about, which could give you an opportunity. So these individual actions, I think, only serve to raise awareness. But in actual change, in climate change, we have to deal with the structures, I feel. In Buddhist cosmology, it's very clear that the universe goes through cycles of destruction and arising again. Just as all phenomena arise and remain and cease and come out of causes and conditions, the universe itself goes through that. So, not knowing how this climate change episode will end, ultimately, if we go by Buddhist astrophysics, not scientific astrophysics, Buddhist astrophysics, this universe is going to be, if the universe is going to be destroyed, definitely the earth is going to be destroyed. And we as a species, as we are now, will be destroyed. We are talking of millions of years, we are not talking of like a few hundred years as in the climate change thing. So, that is another sort of aspect to this whole thing, which also prompts some section of people to say, I guess, that either one of two things, Well, we didn't create the universe. There are certain laws which are in motion, and they will just take their course, whether you deal with corporates or you deal with coffee cups. See, and so how do we deal with this also? And the other question or the despair or the logic is, so what will happen when there is complete destruction of the climate and the ecosystem as we know it? We will die. I will die. But I'm going to die anyway. If not of climate change or natural causes or bomb when Pakistan throws the atom bomb at us or whatever. So if I'm going to die, what difference does it make if I die because climate is changing or die before something has happened? What about future generations and so on? So I'm just throwing these things out, and I feel somewhere it is connected to your question of why we are not motivated enough to do things, because the despair is so great, and somewhere there is this knowledge that nothing is really going to help.
So I have a view on this more from an astrophysics perspective to some extent. So one of the things that when we study star formation or galaxy formation and so on, we realize that there's stars die in a supernova and then they are reborn as fresh stars, and some of the material that the heavy elements get composed during that process beyond iron and all those and so on. So all the elements that we have on Earth here, they are not produced in the basic processes of a star but in a supernova. So that means that we are all life forms are essentially not, we think of it as carbon, hydrogen, oxygen as the most important thing, but we also have a lot of fine, heavier elements. So essentially we are all stardust in that sense, literally so. It's not a poetic statement. And even 1,000 years ago, Maulana Rumi said, "Lo man, in the split the heart of the atom, and therein you will find the sun." And when Enrico Fermi found fission in 1939, this is one of the sentences that he remembered, and just like for the nuclear thing, Oppenheimer remembering brighter than 1,000 suns description from the Bhagavad Gita. So the point is that we are, whatever life form we are such a young species, and even though there might be life anywhere else in the cosmos, to the best of our knowledge, we only have life. We know of life here, and mathematically, possibly there could be millions of planets with this kind of life. But we are so far away from each other, we haven't found it. So in some sense, just as we think of the Alaya or the Tathagata Garbha, etc., similarly the mind of life on Earth, the planet is a womb for that, and it's the only womb that we know of. And therefore, to nurture this womb as long as possible, whether it is in the context of climate change, CIA, anything which affects any of us, affects all of us. And we have to have this deep reverence for life, not just in a poetic sense, but almost, or even in a religious or spiritual sense, but in the Western scientific sense, or even like Charvak philosophy in India, in a very, very materialistic sense, we need to have a reverence for how this stardust turns into the life form that we have. And from here, nurture it and protect it as far as possible so that we develop the science, and I'm just talking a scientific viewpoint, that we develop the scientific understanding to be able to explore the cosmos, to be able, the mechanisms to explore the cosmos, to find the interconnectedness of life not only on the planet here, but across the cosmos. And that's going to be a long journey. We don't know, it may take hundreds of years, it may take thousands of years. So on those time scales, we have a huge responsibility. So how much ever fear or despair we feel, we need to have that attitude of aspiration, like holiness talks about long life aspiration. We need to have that long life aspiration for the species, the humans, and all sentient life forms and the earth, so that we are able to sustain this, so that we give birth to an intelligence that connects across the cosmos and is able to understand the vastness. I think that would be a sort of, if I may call it a star maker, kind of perspective from an astrophysics viewpoint.
When we speak of despair, and I was reminded of yesterday's David Brazier's presentation. Is it a problem of love? No? Is this whole issue coming across because we have not been able to love sufficiently. You know, because if I'm just trying to look at how would I juxtapose despair, the notion of despair and the notion of love. And if I relate it to my experience, my despair always has been inversely proportional to the ability or to feel or give love. You can feel despair even if you can't give love. Now, it's not only a question of being able to receive love. So, I think, what we need to look at is a more, there are lots of why are these technical and political solutions not working? So, because we are looking at still at a layer which is far removed from where the problem is actually there. The problem is about human nature, finally, and our human nature's inability, in a certain sense, to realize love that is unconditional, selfless, egoless, whatever our great prophets have been speaking about. And during the dialogue, I was talking about, the notion of non-duality. Most traditions, a superficial study of traditions make us feel that, it's to be attained, like what you are saying. Wisdom is to be attained, a state of non-duality is to be attained. But actually, even an act of, even a speech act, what I'm doing, or sitting together, we are already transcending that sense of duality. So it's not like, and it's literally true that nirvana is samsara. That you can, in every gesture of yours, every speech act, every bodily act, and every mindful act, you are already breaking the barriers of duality. What we are unfortunately, I think, doing is we are breaking those barriers without yet not believing that we are breaking. Yet we are thinking that we are to do something else and become, enlightened or attain that state of non-duality. Every time we speak, we are already in a non-dual situation. I right now am already in a non-dual situation. Viscerally, I am not feeling it. The way it's like, intellectually I am articulating this, but viscerally, whether I believe it or not, I'm incapable of feeling that. And that probably is what I think, in a certain sense, what Brazier was talking about, that has a lot to do with our, not taking love seriously. We've played at being in love, we've played at being in relationships, but we are not there. We're scared of all that.
So, in some sense, the role of science, for instance, would have to be like would have to change from the current model where we are trying to play with the environment and materials and see how we can benefit from that or understand the laws, but more like a mother who takes care of her womb and her child in terms of, and when I say the child, it is life form on earth and earth itself, in order to ensure, and that would be what I said earlier would be the big picture, the wide picture, but it would have to be fine-grained, and fine-grained in the sense, just as a mother takes care of what she eats or so on, that fine-grainedness and how from moment to moment each of us as individuals or science as a whole relates to the planet. So the relationship of science to the planet has to be redefined independent of the economic model of the time, whether it is communism or capitalism or globalization and so on. So that would involve love, as Milind was saying, because love, of course, there's a sexual and romantic component to the love and the masculine, feminine aspect, but really the love of, science has become somewhat associated with a male way of, conventionally masculine, and you explained all that in the morning, and keeping that in mind, but really not only the Shiva side of it, but the Shakti, the wisdom side of how to engage with the life on the planet. That love has to be there, and we need to redefine the relationship of science and life on the planet in terms of love and not exploitation. And I think that's a very challenging shift, but it needs to be articulated.
Despair, interconnectedness. I think there are two important aspects that have been brought out here. I will speak in the context of climate change. We in the sense, our organization, Laya, based at Visakhapatnam, initiated a network with some friends, and some of them are here. Siddharth is a member, John, and Augustine. And there are many others across the country. We started in a small way in 1996 or 7, and so it's so many years of experience. So there should be so much of despair. If Siddhartha feels despair yesterday or last year, it's been so many years of despair. But my view on despair is exactly the opposite. I don't despair. We have argued this among us also. I don't despair because somewhere, I'm also motivated by what you were saying, and I cannot exactly relate between here and now versus the deeper and the overall thing. So I see it that way. There are things with which we need to engage here and now, but we are looking at the broader picture which we cannot control or relate at this point in time. But what we do now, we can relate it with that broader. That's how I don't feel the despair. For example, I personally have been involved in climate change education for the last 7-8 years. And we have developed curriculum and things like that, and this thing. And I can find meaning in all this. And I also see things happening and people getting aware. Is that enough? I certainly would say no. But I don't despair because I see scope in relating to that. In agriculture, we have moved into sustainable agriculture, focusing on millets, this, that. And in a way, we feel that what we are doing relates with the larger picture, but we are happy with, not limited, but relating with something which we see the connections of. And so on. Also in energy, we've been involved in cook stoves, running into 11,000 cook stoves, water filters, again from the point of view of carbon emissions. Now that's where the catch is. I don't know what you all may have discussed in the dialogues. We have environmental issues anywhere in the world, definitely here and everywhere. And we have difficulty in relating with them because the power structures that be and our efforts are not always successful. Sometimes they are. Now, if we have so much of difficulties dealing with environmental issues, you can imagine how much difficult it is to deal with carbon emissions, which we cannot see. It is like karma. Something that has been started in 1750 onwards in a big way. There were carbon emissions naturally, historically. We don't deal with that. With this surge and about which we are concerned, it is like karma. And these gases have their own life cycle of 70, 100 or whatever years, depending on which gas we are talking about. Now, and they seem to have, or we have now been certain, not fully certain, up to 97%, saying that these have effects in the world today as we see them, experience them. But some may deny, some may say, like with the erratic rainfall, cyclones and so on and so forth, forest fires and so on. Now, dealing with that kind of a thing appears to be far beyond. In spite of all the effort that have gone in, and so if we get into that, some people may claim that we are actually working for something meaningful, even at the political decision-making processes across nations. When it comes to technology, there has been a lot of technological changes, including use of hydrogen and whatever other things to show what can be done. Electric vehicles, for example, is banded as a solution to the fossil fuel, one of the solutions to fossil fuel and so on, and materials. So you will see see signs of change taking place. If you were able to put all these together, our understanding of despair may be slightly different. I'm not saying that things are much better and should be not be looked at. So I think our way of seeing things at that level is a bit difficult, nebulous as probably what we were looking at it here. But here and now, I think that if we are not acting, whether it is light, bulb, this and that, I think it is always, it's not so much the light and the bulb, but it is the mental and volitional commitment towards relating this process that is important.
I am beginning to feel that there's no point despairing because it leads nowhere. Whether human beings will survive on the planet or not, one doesn't know. But either way, if we can sing, dance, act, meditate, chant, love, and make this a kind of axiom, and through that also experience joy. And I keep thinking that maybe this is possible. Whether the human life or life of sentient beings survive on the planet or not, that we can still do this. And like Dominic said, it's possible that it's not impossible that we survive this crisis. So it's just something which in recent months has been forming, that we take a proactive, positive, despite part of our mind being aware that we may not succeed, that climate change might finish human life on the planet.
The 100th monkey, maybe some of you are aware of this phenomenon. There was a scientist that went into a forest and he was studying the monkeys in the forest, various groups of monkeys. And he saw that some of them have started breaking open a fruit by using a stone. And it was random, and these monkeys who had started doing that were not being observed by other monkeys around them. They were doing it in isolation, and their numbers were increasing, but very slowly. It was not like so it was not copying it, but it was happening, and it was happening in the different groups. And then the numbers, even though they were increasing very slowly, so let's say there were 10,000 monkeys in the entire forest, there was a point when this way of opening the fruit reached the 100th monkey. So in the 10,000 there were 100 monkeys that were doing it this way. And that day, boom, every monkey in the forest was opening the fruit that way. So it's like, this phenomenon has been, I think it can be called the critical mass also.
Quantity turning into quality.
Yeah,
or quality turning into quantity.
I just derive a lot of hope from this story, because I'm like, okay, even if I can't convert others or whatever, can I be the monkey? So that's, in my own life, it's been helping me a lot.